The forest was quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the cool Montana breeze. Emily Carter tightened the strap of her camera bag as she stepped carefully over a fallen log. She had always loved hiking alone. It gave her time to think, to breathe, and to capture the beauty of nature without distractions. Today, however, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy she couldn't quite explain. As she climbed higher up the trail, a loud noise shattered the stillness, a deep rumble followed by a deafening crash that echoed through the trees. Startled, Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. At first, she thought it might have been thunder, but the sky above was clear, painted in soft hues of orange and pink as the sun began its descent. Curiosity tugged at her, urging her toward the source of the sound. Pushing aside thick branches, Emily made her way deeper into the woods. Her boots crunched against the dry leaves scattered across the ground. After several minutes of walking, she stumbled upon a scene unlike anything she'd ever imagined. A massive object, twisted and smoking, lay embedded in the earth. It wasn't like any airplane or helicopter she'd seen before. Its surface shimmered faintly, as if made of some kind of metal that didn't belong on Earth. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Could this be a spaceship? The idea seemed absurd, yet there was no denying the otherworldly appearance of the wreckage. Hesitant but unable to resist, she moved closer, her camera dangling forgotten from her shoulder. As she approached, she noticed movement inside the craft. Something, or someone, was alive in there. Her pulse raced as she peered through a jagged opening in the hull. What she saw took her breath away. Lying unconscious amidst the debris was a figure clad in armor that gleamed despite being scorched and cracked. The being was tall, taller than any human, with skin that shimmered faintly under the fading sunlight. Its features were sharp, almost sculpted, and its hands ended in long, slender fingers tipped with claws. Though clearly injured, the creature exuded a sense of power and strength. For a moment, Emily considered turning back. This was far beyond anything she could handle. But then she noticed the slow rise and fall of its chest. Whoever, or whatever, this was, it was alive. And it needed help. Summoning every ounce of courage, Emily slipped inside the wreckage. The air smelled metallic and burnt, making her nose wrinkle. She knelt beside the alien, studying its injuries. One arm appeared broken, and dark liquid oozed from a gash on its side. With trembling hands, she pulled out her water bottle and a clean cloth from her backpack. Gently, she dabbed at the wound, trying not to startle the creature. Her touch must have stirred it, because suddenly, its eyes snapped open. They were wide and glowing, filled with a mix of confusion and alarm. Emily froze, unsure of what to do next. The alien stared at her, its gaze piercing yet strangely vulnerable. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the alien relaxed, though its expression remained guarded. Emily offered a small smile, hoping it would convey kindness. "It's okay," she said softly, even though she doubted it understood her. "I'm here to help." The alien blinked, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly. It tried to speak, but all that came out was a low guttural sound. Despite the language barrier, Emily sensed intelligence behind those luminous eyes. Whatever this being was, it wasn't mindless or hostile. At least, not toward her. With great effort, the alien lifted one hand, pointing weakly at its injured side. Emily nodded, understanding. She worked quickly, using strips of fabric torn from her jacket to bandage the wound as best she could. Throughout the process, the alien watched her intently, its expression unreadable. When she finished, Emily sat back on her heels, exhaling deeply. She had done all she could for now. Looking around at the wrecked ship, she wondered how this creature had ended up here, and whether it was alone. The alien, still weak but more alert now, studied Emily with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Its glowing eyes followed her every move as she rummaged through her backpack for anything else that might help. Though it couldn't speak her language, Its body language spoke volumes: tilted head, slight shifts in posture, and the way its claws flexed ever so slightly when she came too close. Emily noticed these subtle signs but didn't let them scare her off. She had always been good at reading people, or creatures, as it turned out, and she could tell this one wasn't trying to harm her. Emily pulled out a granola bar and held it up hesitantly. "Food?" she asked, pronouncing the word slowly. The alien tilted its head again, then reached out with trembling fingers to take the offering. It examined the wrapper carefully before tearing it open. After sniffing the contents cautiously, it took a small bite. Whatever taste hit its senses seemed surprising. It paused mid-chew, blinked once, then continued eating. Watching it eat gave Emily a strange sense of relief. Maybe they weren't so different after all. She pointed to herself and said, "Emily." Then, gesturing toward the alien, she raised an eyebrow, silently asking for its name. At first, the alien looked confused, but after a moment, it tapped its chest and made a low rolling sound. It repeated the noise twice. "Kalfar. Kale. Kalfar." Emily tried, mangling the syllables. The alien, Kalfar, nodded slightly, though a flicker of amusement crossed its face. Emily grinned despite herself. "Okay, Kalfar," she said, pointing to him again. "We'll work on that later." As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Emily knew staying near the wreckage wasn't safe, especially if anyone else came looking for the crash site. She motioned for Kalfar to follow her, mimicking walking motions with her hands. He hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave his ship behind, but eventually nodded. Using a fallen branch as support, he stood unsteadily, towering over her by at least 2 feet. His movements were slow and deliberate, each step accompanied by a soft grunt of pain. They moved away from the wreckage, heading deeper into the forest where the trees offered some cover. Along the way, Emily kept glancing back to make sure Kalfar was keeping up. Despite his injuries, he managed to match her pace, though sweat beaded on his brow, or whatever passed for a brow under those shimmering scales. When they finally reached a small clearing sheltered by thick bushes, Emily stopped and began gathering dry leaves and twigs. Kalfar watched her build a fire, his expression unreadable. Once the flames crackled softly, casting warm light across the clearing, Emily sat down and gestured for him to do the same. For a while, neither of them spoke, or rather, neither of them could speak. Instead, they communicated through gestures and sounds, piecing together fragments of understanding. Emily pointed upward at the stars and then back at Kalfar, raising her eyebrows questioningly. He nodded and made a sweeping motion with his arm, indicating something vast and far away. She guessed he was telling her he came from beyond Earth. Her mind raced with questions. Who was he? Why had he come here? What happened to his ship? But she knew there was no way to ask them yet. Instead, she focused on simpler things. Pulling out another granola bar, she handed it to him and smiled. "More food," she said, tapping the wrapper. Kalfar accepted it with what looked like gratitude, though his sharp features made it hard to read emotions clearly. As he ate, Emily noticed how methodical he was, almost as if even eating required careful thought. After a while, Kalfar leaned forward and pointed at her camera bag. "What is?" he asked haltingly, his voice rough but surprisingly clear. Emily blinked in surprise. He was learning already. Picking up the camera, she showed it to him and pressed the button to take a picture. The flash startled both of them, and Kalfar recoiled slightly before leaning in to examine the tiny screen. "Camera," Emily said, pointing at the device. "Pictures." She flipped through a few photos stored on it, showing him images of mountains, rivers, and wildlife. Kalfar's glowing eyes widened slightly as he studied the screen. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and touched the image of a deer, his clawed finger tracing its outline. Emily smiled softly. "Yes, animals," she said, nodding. "Earth animals." Though their communication remained limited, a quiet connection formed between them, a fragile bridge built on shared moments and mutual curiosity. As the fire crackled and the forest grew darker around them, Emily realized something important. Helping Calithar wasn't just about survival anymore. It felt like the right thing to do, plain and simple. The next morning, Emily woke up to find Calithar sitting by the dying embers of their campfire. His posture was stiff, his glowing eyes scanning the forest with an intensity that made her wonder if he had slept at all. She stretched and yawned, brushing leaves from her jacket before joining him. "Morning," she said softly, though she knew he wouldn't understand. Calithar glanced at her briefly before returning his gaze to the trees. He seemed restless, his fingers tapping lightly against the ground. Emily guessed he was thinking about his ship and how to fix it. She pointed in the direction of the wreckage and mind hammering with her hands. "Repair?" she asked, hoping he'd get the idea. To her relief, Calithar nodded. He struggled to stand, leaning heavily on a long stick Emily had found for him earlier. Together, they made their way back to the crash site. Along the way, Calithar stopped occasionally to examine plants or rocks, sometimes picking one up and inspecting it closely. Emily didn't interrupt him. She figured he was searching for materials that might help repair his ship. When they arrived at the wreckage, Calithar immediately began assessing the damage. Emily watched as he moved around the twisted metal, occasionally muttering under his breath in his strange language. Though most of the words were incomprehensible, his tone conveyed frustration and determination. After a while, he turned to Emily and gestured toward the surrounding area, then pointed at the ship. It took her a moment, but she realized he wanted her to gather anything useful nearby. Emily nodded and got to work. She scavenged scraps of metal, wires, and other bits from the debris field. Some pieces looked like they came straight out of science fiction movies, smooth, shiny, and unlike anything she'd ever seen. As she worked, Calithar joined in, using tools salvaged from inside the ship to start repairs. His movements were slow but precise, every action deliberate. At one point, Calithar handed Emily a small device that resembled a flashlight. He pointed at the damaged section of the ship and tapped the gadget. "Hold this," he instructed, his broken English improving slightly. Emily obeyed, holding the tool steady while he adjusted something beneath the panel. Sparks flew briefly, making her jump, but Calithar remained calm, focused entirely on the task. As the day wore on, their teamwork became smoother. Emily learned quickly which parts Calithar needed and anticipated his requests. In return, he taught her basic commands in his language. Push, pull, stop. Their progress was slow, but each small success brought them closer to getting the ship operational again. During a break, Emily sat beside Calithar, sipping water from her bottle. She pointed at the sky and then at him, repeating the word home. Calithar hesitated, then shook his head. He touched his chest, then spread his arms wide, shaking them as if to indicate conflict. Emily frowned, trying to piece together what he meant. Finally, she pointed at herself and said, "Enemy." Calithar nodded sharply. "Yes, enemy chased me." It was the longest sentence he'd spoken yet, and Emily felt a surge of pride, not just for him, but for both of them. They were communicating, really communicating. "Why?" she asked, pointing at him. Calithar sighed, looking troubled. He minded fighting, then pointed upward again. "War, my people, fight." Emily didn't fully understand, but she nodded anyway. Wars weren't new to her. They happened all the time on Earth. But imagining battles between alien species felt surreal. Still, she could see the weight of it in Calithar's eyes. Whatever war he was running from, it had cost him dearly. By late afternoon, they had managed to stabilize part of the ship's power system. Calithar tested it cautiously, pressing buttons and watching lights flicker on inside the cockpit. For the first time since meeting him, Emily saw a hint of hope in his expression. But when he turned to thank her, His gratitude was tinged with sadness. "You leave soon?" Emily asked, already knowing the answer. Calthar hesitated, then nodded. "Soon." Though she tried to hide it, Emily felt a pang of disappointment. Helping Calthar had become more than just an act of kindness. It had given her purpose. Yet deep down, she knew he couldn't stay. This wasn't his home, and Earth wasn't ready for visitors like him. Before either of them could dwell on it further, a distant sound caught their attention. A low hum, growing louder. Calthar tensed, his glowing eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. Emily followed his gaze, dread settling in her stomach. Something, or someone, was coming. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the trees and sending a shiver down Emily's spine. Calthar grabbed her arm firmly but gently, pulling her behind one of the larger chunks of wreckage. His movements were quick and deliberate, his glowing eyes scanning the sky with intense focus. Emily crouched low, clutching her camera bag tightly as her heart pounded in her chest. A sleek, dark shape appeared above the treetops, hovering silently before descending toward the crash site. It wasn't like Calthar's ship. This one was smaller, more menacing, with sharp edges that glinted in the sunlight. Emily swallowed hard. Whoever, or whatever, was inside clearly meant business. Calthar leaned close to her ear, his voice barely above a whisper. "Bad ones," he said, his broken English urgent. "Hide." Emily nodded, though every instinct told her to run. She stayed put, watching as the ship landed a short distance away. A ramp extended from its underside, and 3 figures stepped out. They were humanoid but unmistakably alien, their skin pale gray and their eyes cold and black. Each carried a weapon that looked advanced and deadly. Calthar tensed beside her, his claws flexing slightly. He muttered something under his breath, his tone bitter. Emily glanced at him, fear mixing with curiosity. "Who?" she whispered. "Vorin," he replied, spitting the word out like it left a bad taste in his mouth. "Enemies." The Vorin began searching the area, their movements methodical and efficient. Emily held her breath, praying they wouldn't find them. But luck wasn't on their side. One of the aliens paused near the wreckage, spotting a piece of equipment Calthar had been working on earlier. It raised its weapon, signaling to the others. Calthar cursed softly and stood up, stepping into view. "No hide," he said grimly. "They find us anyway." Emily scrambled to her feet, gripping his arm. "What do we do?" Calthar hesitated, then pointed toward the forest. "Run. Now." Before Emily could protest, he charged forward, roaring in his strange language. The sound was deep and guttural, shaking the air around them. The Vorin turned their weapons on him, firing beams of light that sizzled past his head. Calthar dodged, moving surprisingly fast for someone so injured. He tackled one of the aliens, knocking it to the ground with a heavy thud. "Go!" he shouted at Emily, his voice strained but clear. She wanted to argue, to help, but she knew she'd only get in the way. Clutching her camera bag, she sprinted into the woods, branches whipping at her face as she ran. Behind her, she heard shouts and blasts, followed by the sickening crunch of metal hitting flesh. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to keep moving. After several minutes, she reached another clearing and collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. Her mind raced with questions. Was Calthar okay? Had he defeated the Vorin? Or had they captured, or worse, killed, him? Just as she considered going back, a rustling sound came from the bushes. Emily froze, her pulse racing. Slowly, Calthar emerged, battered but alive. Blood trickled from a fresh wound on his forehead, and his armor was scorched in places, but he was standing. "You? Okay?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Calthar nodded, though his expression was grim. "Not safe yet," he said. "More come." Emily stared at him, her fear giving way to determination. "Then we need to finish your ship. Fast." Calthar studied her for a moment, his glowing eyes softening slightly. "You brave," he said simply. "Thank you." Together, they hurried back to the wreckage, avoiding the spot where the Vorin had landed. The enemy ship was gone, but the threat still loomed over them. Every step felt heavier than the last, exhaustion weighing on both of them. Yet neither slowed down. Time was running out. Back at the crash site, Calthar worked feverishly, repairing critical systems, while Emily helped wherever she could. They communicated mostly through gestures now, too focused to waste time on words. Sparks flew as Calthar soldered wires together, his hand steady despite his injuries. Finally, after what felt like hours, the ship's engines roared to life. Lights flickered on inside the cockpit, bathing the area in a soft glow. Calthar let out a sigh of relief, leaning against the hull for support. "Ready," he said, turning to Emily. "Time to go." But Emily hesitated. If Calthar left now, she might never see him again. And though she barely knew him, the thought filled her with an unexpected sadness. As Calthar prepared the ship for takeoff, Emily stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She had done everything she could to help him, to save him, but now he was leaving. And though she understood why, it didn't make saying goodbye any easier. Calthar climbed into the cockpit and began pressing buttons, his movements quick and precise. Lights blinked on the control panel, and the hum of the engines grew louder. He glanced over his shoulder at Emily, his glowing eyes softening. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the open seat beside him. Emily hesitated. "Me? Go with you?" "Yes," Calthar replied simply, though his tone left no room for argument. "Not safe here." For a moment, Emily's heart raced with excitement. Traveling into space, seeing other worlds, it sounded like something out of a dream. But then reality hit her. Earth was her home. Her family, her friends, her entire life was here. Could she really leave all of that behind? Before she could decide, another sound cut through the air, a distant rumble followed by the whirring of helicopter blades. Both Emily and Calthar turned toward the noise, their expressions tense. A news chopper appeared above the treetops, its cameras pointed directly at them. Moments later, more vehicles arrived, police cars skidding to a stop along the forest edge, officers spilling out with weapons drawn. "Humans find us," Calthar muttered, frustration evident in his voice. "No time." Emily's mind raced. If the authorities captured Calthar, they'd lock him up, or worse. They wouldn't understand him, wouldn't see him as anything more than a threat. She couldn't let that happen, not after everything they'd been through together. "We need a plan," she said quickly, looking around for inspiration. Then it came to her. "Follow me." She grabbed Calthar's hand and pulled him away from the ship, leading him deeper into the woods. Behind them, shouts echoed as officers and reporters swarmed the crash site. Emily led Calthar through thick underbrush, using every trick she knew to cover their tracks. At one point, she stopped to smear mud over their footprints, hoping it would throw off anyone following them. After several minutes of running, they reached a narrow ravine hidden by dense foliage. Emily motioned for Calthar to stay low, then peeked over the edge to check for pursuers. So far, so good, but they couldn't stay there forever. Calthar leaned against a tree, breathing heavily. His injuries were catching up to him, and the stress of the chase wasn't helping. Emily knelt beside him, offering what little comfort she could. "We're close," she assured him. "Just hang on." He nodded weakly, trusting her completely. That trust gave Emily strength. She had promised to help him, and she wasn't about to break that promise now. Finally, when the coast seemed clear, they doubled back toward the ship. Moving cautiously, they avoided the main crash site and approached from a different angle. The news helicopters were still circling overhead, but most of the ground forces had moved closer to investigate the wreckage. It was risky, but it was their best chance. Reaching the ship undetected, Calthar hurried inside while Emily kept watch. Once he was settled, he called out to her again. "Come," he urged, his voice urgent. This time, Emily didn't hesitate. Climbing aboard, she strapped herself into the seat beside him. Calthar wasted no time, powering up the engines and lifting off just as the first officers spotted them. Bullets pinged harmlessly off the hull as the ship ascended rapidly, leaving the chaos below. Through the window, Emily watched the forest shrink beneath them, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and exhilaration. She had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again. The ship shuddered as it climbed higher into the sky, the world below growing smaller with each passing second. Emily gripped the edge of her seat tightly, her knuckles white. She had never been on an airplane before, let alone a spaceship, and the sensation of weightlessness made her stomach churn. Beside her, Calthar focused intently on the controls, his glowing eyes scanning the panels and screens in front of him. Though his movements were calm, Emily could see the tension in his posture. "We're not safe yet," Calthar said, his voice low but clear. He pointed at a cluster of blinking red dots on one of the screens. "Voran ships. They wait for us." Emily's heart sank. Even now, after escaping Earth, they weren't free. The Voran were out there, lurking somewhere beyond the stars, ready to capture or destroy them. She glanced at Calthar, searching for reassurance, but his expression was grim. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Calthar hesitated, then turned to face her fully. "You should leave," he said firmly. "Take escape pod. Go back to Earth." Emily shook her head immediately. "No way. I'm not leaving you." "You must," Calthar insisted, his tone softening. "This is my fight, not yours. You already risked too much for me." "I don't care," Emily shot back, surprising even herself with how firm she sounded. "I got you into this mess, and I'm seeing it through. Besides," she paused, looking out the window at the endless expanse of space. "Where would I go? Back to Earth. After all this." Calthar studied her for a long moment, his glowing eyes unreadable. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay. Together." Relief washed over Emily, though she knew the danger wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Calthar returned his attention to the controls, adjusting dials and pressing buttons. The ship hummed louder as it accelerated, heading straight toward the blockade of Voran vessels waiting ahead. Through the windshield, Emily could see the enemy ships now, dark, jagged shapes floating ominously against the backdrop of stars. They reminded her of predators lying in wait, their weapons trained directly on them. Her breath caught in her throat. "How will we get past them?" she whispered. Calthar didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, tapping a sequence of commands into the control panel. A holographic map appeared between them, showing their current position and the surrounding area. With a few swift motions, Calthar plotted a course that zigzagged wildly through the blockade. It looked risky, almost suicidal, but Emily trusted him. "Hold tight," he warned, gripping the controls. "This will be rough." Before Emily could respond, the ship lurched forward, speeding toward the Voran blockade. Alarms blared inside the cockpit as enemy fire streaked past them, narrowly missing the hull. Calthar maneuvered the ship with incredible skill, dodging blasts and weaving through gaps between the enemy vessels. Each near miss sent Emily's heart racing, but she forced herself to stay calm, for Calthar's sake. At one point, a massive explosion rocked the ship, throwing both of them sideways. Smoke filled the cockpit, and warning lights flashed everywhere. Emily coughed, waving her hand to clear the air. "Are we hit?" she shouted over the noise. "Minor damage," Calthar replied, his voice strained but steady. "Keep going." Somehow, despite the chaos, they managed to slip through the blockade. The last Voran ship fell behind them, its weapons firing uselessly into empty space. For the first time since taking off, Emily allowed herself to breathe again. She slumped back in her seat, her entire body shaking with adrenaline. Calthar exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "We did it," he said, glancing at her with a hint of pride. "You brave, Emily." She managed a weak smile, still trying to process everything that had happened. They were alive and free, for now, but she knew their journey was far from over. "Where are we going?" she asked. Cathar tapped a button, bringing up another map. A distant moon blinked on the screen, surrounded by a ring of debris. "Rebel base," he explained. "Safe place. My allies there." Emily nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they'd find some peace soon. But for now, she settled into her seat, gazing out at the vastness of space. No matter what lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the same person who had set out on that hike in the Montana woods. The rebel base was unlike anything Emily had ever imagined. Nestled within the shadow of a distant moon, it floated silently among fields of drifting asteroids and glowing space debris. The structure itself looked like a patchwork of ships and modules welded together, its surface scarred from countless battles. To Emily, it seemed both chaotic and beautiful, a testament to survival against all odds. As Cathar guided their damaged ship toward the base, Emily couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and apprehension. She didn't know what to expect. Would these rebels welcome her? Or would they see her as an outsider, a threat? Her grip tightened on the edge of her seat as they approached the docking bay. Cathar must have noticed her unease because he glanced at her briefly before speaking. "They are good," he reassured her. "Not like foreign." Emily nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Still, she trusted Cathar. If he believed in these people, she would too, for now. The ship docked with a soft hiss, and Cathar led Emily through the airlock into the base. Inside, the corridors were dimly lit, filled with the hum of machinery and the faint scent of oil. Rebels moved about. Their appearances varied, some humanoid, others distinctly alien, but all shared the same determined expressions. Many stopped to stare as Cathar passed, their eyes widening in surprise when they noticed Emily trailing behind him. One figure stepped forward, a tall alien with deep blue skin and piercing yellow eyes. He wore armor similar to Cathar's, but adorned with more intricate markings. "Cathar," he exclaimed, his voice rough yet warm. "You live?" "Yes, Joran," Cathar replied, nodding. Thanks to her, he gestured toward Emily, who instinctively took a small step back. Joran tilted his head, studying her curiously. "A human. How?" "It is. Long story," Cathar said, glancing at Emily. "She saved me." "Risked much." Joran's expression softened, and he gave Emily a respectful nod. "Then you are welcome here." Relief washed over Emily, though she still felt out of place. These rebels were fighters, warriors hardened by years of conflict. What could she possibly offer them? Cathar introduced her to others in the base, explaining how she had helped repair his ship and evade capture. Each time, Emily received nods of approval or murmurs of gratitude. Though none of them spoke her language fluently, their body language conveyed respect, and maybe even admiration. Later, Cathar brought Emily to a quiet corner of the base where supplies were stored. He handed her a small device that fit neatly in her palm. "For you," he said simply. "What is it?" Emily asked, turning the object over in her hands. "Translator," Cathar explained. "Helps you understand us and speak." Emily's eyes widened in amazement. "You made this for me?" He nodded. "You deserve it. For everything." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Over the next few days, Emily began learning more about the rebels and their fight against the Vorin. They showed her maps of star systems, told stories of victories and losses, and shared their hopes for the future. Slowly, she started to feel like part of their team, even if she wasn't a soldier. But despite the warmth and camaraderie, Emily knew her time here was temporary. Earth was still her home, and she couldn't stay forever. One evening, as she stood beside Cathar watching the stars through a viewport, she finally voiced what had been weighing on her mind. "I need to go back," she said softly. Calthar looked at her, his glowing eyes thoughtful. "I know," he replied, "but not alone." He promised to escort her safely to Earth once repairs to his ship were complete. Until then, Emily resolved to make the most of her time with the rebels. She might not belong to their world, but she had earned their trust, and theirs, hers. As she gazed out at the endless expanse of space, Emily realized something important. Courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about stepping forward, even when you didn't know what lay ahead. And for the first time in her life, she truly felt brave. The day finally came for Emily to leave the rebel base. Calthar had spent hours making sure his ship was ready for the journey back to Earth, double-checking every system and running tests, until he was satisfied it could handle the trip. Emily watched him work, marveling at how focused and determined he was. She knew she would miss that about him, the quiet strength that had carried them both through so much. When everything was prepared, Calthar turned to her with a small device in his hand. It was a communicator, similar to the translator he'd given her earlier. "Take this," he said, pressing it into her palm. "If you ever need help, or just want to talk, you can reach me." Emily nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She wanted to say something meaningful, something that would express how grateful she was for everything he had done, but words failed her. Instead, she smiled softly and slipped the communicator into her pocket. Together, they boarded the ship and set off toward Earth. The journey was quieter this time, without the threat of foreign ships or human authorities chasing them. Emily sat in the co-pilot's seat, gazing out at the stars as they streaked past. For the first time since meeting Calthar, she allowed herself to think about what returning home would mean. "What will you do now?" she asked after a long silence. Calthar glanced at her, his glowing eyes thoughtful. "Fight," he replied simply. "The war is not over. My people need me." Emily nodded, understanding. "Will I see you again?" Calthar hesitated before answering. "Maybe, if fate allows." Though his tone was calm, Emily sensed the sadness behind his words. They both knew their paths were diverging, and there was no guarantee they would cross again. Still, she held on to hope that maybe, someday, their worlds would meet once more. As they approached Earth's atmosphere, Calthar guided the ship toward a remote area far from cities or towns. When they landed, Emily unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, looking around at the familiar landscape. Trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the air smelled fresh and clean. "Home. I'll walk from here," she said, turning to face Calthar one last time. "Thank you for everything." Calthar stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch was warm despite his alien appearance. "No, Emily. Thank you asterisk. You showed me humans are not what I thought. You gave me hope." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She didn't want their goodbye to be sad. It had to be hopeful, like the bond they had formed. With a final nod, she stepped out of the ship and onto the soft grass below. She watched as the ship lifted off, its engines humming softly before disappearing into the clouds. For a moment, she felt a pang of loneliness, but then she remembered the communicator in her pocket. He wasn't gone forever. Not really. Walking back toward civilization, Emily couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. From stumbling upon a crashed alien to helping him escape danger, her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. She wasn't the same person who had set out on that hike in the Montana woods. She was braver, stronger, and full of questions about the universe beyond her own world. When she reached town, Emily found herself staring up at the night sky. The stars twinkled brightly, each one a reminder of the vastness waiting beyond Earth. Somewhere out there, Calthar was fighting his battles, and perhaps, one day, humanity might join him in building bridges between worlds. For now, though, Emily was content to share her story. She began writing down everything she had experienced, hoping others would believe her. And even if they didn't, She knew the truth. Somewhere among the stars, an injured alien warrior had been stunned and forever changed by a human's act of kindness.